Hi there. At Jericho Writers we see a lot of manuscripts by first-time writers, and too many of those manuscripts make mistakes that just scream amateur writers. These are things that are easy for you to eradicate from your writing, and your manuscript will 100% get better if you do eliminate those mistakes. I'm Harry Bingham for Jericho Writers, and let's jump straight in. Okay, mistake number one, run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are two or more sentences joined by commas. They are hard to read, they scream amateur writer. And you can see, even by the way that I've read that sentence, that it's confusing to the eye, it's confusing to the reader. What you wanted there was periods or full stops that say, join or sentences joined by commas, full stop, they are hard to read, full stop, they scream amateur writer. Or you could have, they are hard to read and they scream amateur writer. But what you don't want is joining sentences together with commas. Almost always that's the wrong thing to do. Almost always it's hard for the reader to read. So just eliminate them. Periods are free, make use of them. Mistake number two, messing up your possessive pronouns. Now I don't want to get all kind of grammar freak on you. Possessive pronouns is just things like his, hers, its or theirs. And here's an example of how it can go wrong. The boys urged their mounts on. The horses galloped ever faster over the sand until their cloaks blew horizontally behind them. And I hope you heard it there as I was reading. It's like, whose cloaks are we talking about? There actually refers back to the last plural noun, which is the horses. And the horses presumably aren't wearing cloaks, presumably the boys are. But you as the writer know who you mean, but the reader only has the words on the page to go on. So make sure that you're referring back in a totally unambiguous way. If you have to rewrite your text, then rewrite the text. You can't allow that ambiguity to spoil the reader's enjoyment of your story. Okay, mistake number three, adjectival overgrowth. Supposing that last sentence had looked like this. The horses galloped ever faster over the hard, flat, unyielding, golden, endless sand. It's just like too many adjectives, and you don't, it's like you're sort of pointing in 5 different directions at once, and the reader doesn't know what they need to take away from that. So really, it's absolutely fine using adjectives, but 1 or maximum 2 adjectives is almost always the way to go. If in doubt, prune back. You'll almost always strengthen the image you're trying to build. Mistake number 4 is what I call Flappy-hand syndrome. And this is where, you've got a couple of people talking, let's say, and they're always fidgeting, they're always scratching their face or picking their nose or shuffling their feet or nervously sipping their tea. And it's like you're writing this as a writer because you've got this in your head and you're kind of imagining the dialogue like minute by minute on the page, and you think, well, they do scratch their head, so I've got to write that down. You don't have to write it down. It can just be too much. So to take this, for example, she looked nervous, dabbing at her face with her clammy palms, then wringing her hands in a circular movement and shifting her feet on the floor. It just feels like, why are you doing this? Why can't you just say, she looked nervous, and move on? In general, less is more, and if you read back to your text and see what I call Flappy-hand syndrome taking place, just prune it right back. You'll almost never go too far. You just don't need that stuff. One exception may be children's books where you need a bit more of that, but really, in general, less is more. That brings us to mistake number 5, forgetting really obvious words. Okay, he raised his chin and brought it down again in a mark of assent. What do you mean? What you mean is he nodded. Okay, don't use these complex phrases where there's a simple, obvious, usable word. In general, if you can replace 8 words by 1, you should always do it. So don't forget obvious words. Mistake number 6, a little bit more complicated this one, but very important. The viewpoint switcheroo. So here's an example. She felt nervous, she could feel her palms starting to sweat, and she could hear herself talking fast. He wondered whether now was the right time to put his proposal. And you can see that what I've done there in the first paragraph is I'm in her head. She's feelings, she can hear herself talking fast. We, as the reader, are in that character's head. And all of a sudden, next paragraph, he's wondering and we're in his head. And there's no sort of announcement of that, and it's just too abrupt. And it jolts the reader, not just out of the character's head, but out of the book itself. And you don't want to do that. So yes, you can switch viewpoints, but what you've got to do is you've got to do that gracefully. You've got to sort of zoom out of the first character's head and then zoom back into the second one's head. You can't just do those abrupt switches. It's a real classic mistake of the sort of newer writer. Mistake number 7, too much, too fast. So Ursula Le Guin, great science fiction writer, famously wrote a book called The Left Hand of Darkness, which is all about a world where there's human-like people were neither male nor female. They were basically hermaphrodite, and they came into season at different periods, and they could be either male or female during that period. But supposing that instead of Ursula Le Guin, one of the greatest kind of science fiction writers of all time, had written that, supposing that her twin half-sister, well, it can't be a twin half-sister, can you? Her half-sister, Amateur Le Guin, had written that book, she might have written something like this. So on this planet, humans are hermaphrodite and can be either male or female in season. And if you put that up on page 1, chapter 1, you kind of drain all the interesting mystery out of the novel. And instead of having a wonderful unfolding mystery, you've just slapped it there on the first page or the second page, and you've killed the mystery in the book. So if you've got a great mystery, tease it out, let it go slow, and enjoy the very, very slow revelation. Mistake number 8, bed on page 1. Basically, loads of books by newer writers start with a character in bed. If your book starts with a character in bed, just be aware that a huge number of books by new writers are doing the same thing, and it just feels like a cliche. Just avoid it. Try some other opening setting for your book. Avoid the bed. That's a nice simple one. Mistake number 9 is nice and simple as well. It's and it's. Okay. It's easy to get this right, but the manuscript was doomed. An amateur writer had ruined its chances. Now, you know that was wrong, don't you? It's, with an apostrophe, stands for it is. So it's easy, it should be it apostrophe s. It is easy, it's easy. And it's, without an apostrophe, means the thing belonging to it. So an amateur writer had ruined its chances. No apostrophe there, because we're talking about the chances of the manuscript, the thing belonging to it. Get that right. Especially don't make those sort of mistakes in the first few pages of a manuscript, because any alert reader is going to think this writer doesn't really know what they're doing with those sort of mistakes. So a simple one, it's easy to creep in, somewhere in the novel, but certainly don't let that problem appear anywhere in the first few pages. Mistake number 10, the main character cries too much. This is a kind of weird one. One of my books here, it's set over 50 years and hit 2 world wars, and a lot of stuff happens in the book, and I think each of my 2 main protagonists cried 2 or 3 times in my book, and my editor just said to me, Harry, the characters are always crying. I'm like, it's been 50 years, it's been a long time and a lot of bad stuff has happened. And she just said, it feels like too much crying, and from a reader's point of view, it feels like too much crying. So basically, however much is going on in the pages of your book, I would really limit the crying, male or female, to 1, maybe twice in the whole book. And however much stuff happens, you can have lots of emotion, but just don't have the tears. The waterworks can kill a reader's engagement with the reader. Readers are a cruel bunch. Okay, mistake 11, exclamation points. You often find them, and you shouldn't. They make you look like an idiot. It's like laughing at your own joke. And basically the rule here is just avoid exclamation marks. Maybe you can have 1, maybe 2, in every 100,000 words you write, but if you eliminate them completely, that's absolutely fine too. Exclamation points no longer really feel like part of fiction the way it's written today. Just eliminate them from your prose. Mistake number 12. Now this is a kind of weird one, but we do encounter this, and it's abstract noun overload. So for example, the pride that swelled within him in an infinitude of heady optimism moved him to consider the merits of quite alternative possibilities, explanations and modalities. And you as a reader don't really know what I've just said. I as a writer don't really even know what I've just said. And it doesn't feel like a novel at all, okay? Novels are about actual people in the fictional world that you've created, but it needs to feel like an actual real world, making decisions, performing actions, speaking with people, and all that is happening at the concrete level. So nearly everything in your book needs to happen at that concrete level, and then you can lift back and reflect a little bit, but basically you need to stay concrete, stay focused on the specific, and the big sort of thematic stuff will grow out of that, but you don't want to overload your work with abstract nouns. You'll kill your book very, very quickly if you do that. Mistake 13 is a little bit similar. It's the white room, as I call it. Your action takes place in a blank space, or your descriptions are there, but they're extremely bland. And what, as I just said, is that your characters really need to exist in a physical, real world. It's got to really feel real. And that means you can't underweight those descriptions. So if you've got a scene, fairly early on in that scene, you need 1 paragraph that just sets the scene. Where are these people? What's the time of day? What's the weather? What's the scene? What's the atmosphere? And just a paragraph of setting like that, and just keep on nudging through the scene. It doesn't have to be big nudges. You just got to keep reminding the reader where you are and what's happening. That is a brilliant way of making your scenes seem really real, really present, really alive. Mistake 14. Gabbling inventively. He spluttered indignantly. She spat contemptuously. He thundered furiously. Anything like this, it just feels wrong, doesn't it? You can use he said, he answered, she replied. The word said can feature, if that is what you use 95% of the time, and a lot of your dialogue doesn't even have a he said, she said, that's absolutely fine. You don't need all that spluttering and yodeling and spitting and all of that kind of stuff. It's just excessive. Let the dialogue do the work and then use he said, she said. That is absolutely fine. Mistake number 15, unintended repetitions. Now repetitions can be fine, but not like this. Repetitions are inevitable. You get repetition when you repetitively use the same word in the text to produce excess repetition in the text, which can kind of repetitive. And you can already see that that is kind of doing your head in with repetition. And basically, the reader's no longer thinking about the actual words on the page. They're just hearing that horrible buzzing noise in their head, and you've popped them out of the book and out of your text completely. So avoid repetitions, but avoid unintended repetitions. This isn't something where you can be too robotic about it. So T.S. Eliot famously wrote, time past and time present are both perhaps present in time future. And fairly obviously there, the repetitions are totally deliberate and they're part of a beautifully structured sentence. So if the repetitions feel right to you and you've thought about them and you want them, that's absolutely fine. But eliminate the unintended sort basically completely. Mistake number 16, too short, too long. If you're writing an adult novel and it's complete at 40,000 words, frankly, there's hardly a market for that book. There might be self-published online, but even that would be difficult. Certainly no literary agent is going to touch that book. You might get some literary novels of under 65,000 words, but really commercial fiction, if it's traditionally published, it's 75,000 words or more, 75,000 words or more. Equally, if your book is super long, there are some niches like epic fantasy or women's fiction in the sort of saga world where very, very long texts can work well. But, know your genre, know what the limits are in terms of word count and live within those limits. For most of you, 70,000 words to 120,000 words, 140,000 words would be about those limits. But do check out the rules for your specific genre. Don't get that wrong. Mistake 17, weird paragraph spacing. Okay, your manuscript should look like a book, which means that paragraphs are indented. Like this one, for example, look at the first line. It's not fully left justified, it's just indented that little bit. And no gap between paragraphs, please. That's for business letters, not novels. Basically, your book on the page should look like a book, should look like a novel, not like a business letter. And that means no blank lines between paragraphs, and indent that first paragraph. If you're in doubt how to format it, take a look at an actual book. And of course, you get to know the paragraph format menu in your word processing software. That paragraph formatting menu is your friend. Mistake number 18. Hey buddy, we've only just met. And this is where the first 3,000 words of the book introduces multiple timelines, loads of characters, a ton of names, multiple different story starts. And the reader's just thinking, hold on, I've just entered the front door of your novel essentially, and all of a sudden I'm being thrown this ton of information, all of these bewildering variety of characters and timelines and stuff, and I haven't even sort of taken my coat and my hat off. So don't overwhelm the reader at the start of the book. You've got to let them settle in, get them to understand the world they're in, and make sure that you're feeding them new information, because of course they need that, but you're feeding them that stuff at a pace that they can absorb. Too much overload at the start of the book will just crush that front axle of your story, and then a reader will never read on. Okay, mistake number 9 is random capitalizations. Some people write to capital L, literary, capital A, agents, literary agents, instead of just to literary agents. And agents don't count capitals, they're just nouns. Basically, you don't capitalize something because it's important. You capitalize something because either it's at the start of the sentence, or it's a name of a person like John or Jane, or a place like New York. If it's not obviously fitting in those categories, it probably doesn't need capitalizations, and in general, you should certainly avoid capitalizations unless you know exactly why that particular word or phrase is being capitalized. Brings us to mistake number 20. What did you just say? Did you say fiction novel? Because if so, you're not my friend anymore. And you know why. Look, fiction is stories that has just been made up. Novels is longer versions of long pieces of fiction. And so all novels are fiction. So you don't need to say fiction novel, you just say novel. If you start talking about here's my fiction novel, you're just saying I don't really know my own craft, and it's screams amateur writing. You're not going to do that. So that's absolutely fine. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Mistake number 21. Too much text. Now, Stephen King famously said that draft 2 equals draft 1 minus 10%. You know what? He's wrong. it's much more like draft 2 equals draft 1 minus 20 or 30%. What you've got to remember is that Stephen King was a journalist before he was a novelist, and journalists are trained to write text very lean, and so he brought that discipline with him into novel writing. So his trimming of the text from draft 1 to draft 2 was pretty lightweight. Most of the novels we see, first-time novels that we see, but by some very gifted and talented writers, a lot of them can easily lose 20%. I'm not talking about taking away a lot of content, we're just taking about the content that exists and finding ways to deliver that exact content in fewer words than we did before. You can always cut more than you think, in my experience. Mistake number 22. I don't care about your planet. So let's say that the opening page of your book looked like this. The Zarav uranium mines were almost worked out. Tunnels were left in a state of collapse, often with the original mine bots left feebly clanking inside. And blah, 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 for 4 or 5 more paragraphs until we actually meet somebody. And the fact is, readers don't care about worlds, they care about characters. And you've always got to introduce the world via the character. So what you want is, you want somebody, I don't know, sitting at the front of the mine, cleaning their boots, and you engage with that person, engage in that act of cleaning their boots, and then you can slowly filter the information you've got about your world, which may be really interesting and really wonderful, but you filter in that world building type information via the character. And although I've given a sort of science fiction type example here, the same thing would absolutely happen with historical fiction, but it could even happen with kind of contemporary fiction set in a place that people know well. So if you're in a kind of tech startup world in New York, you still have to kind of explain what that setting is because not everybody knows it. So you've always got to do that kind of world building exercise, but do it via character, don't just do it up front. Mistake 23, open bracket, close bracket, delete bracket. Look, basic, if you use brackets in fiction, you really shouldn't. It's one thing if you're quoting a little newspaper article and you're a fictional newspaper article, you've got brackets in that, but really brackets don't belong in fiction. You should pretty much eliminate them from your text. Nice, simple piece of advice there. Mistake number 24, the mirror in the hall. So here's an example. She ran out of the house late as usual. Passing the hall mirror, she just had time to, very conveniently, deliver a full detailed report on her appearance to the reader so that the writer is satisfied that the reader has an idea of who this character is. And you know what, the trouble with that kind of thing is it really breaks the character, because this character should be rushing out of the house. It breaks the story because, again, they've got urgent business to attend to. So you're delivering a description at the cost of the character and the story, and the character and the story should always come first. So just delay that character description until it arises in a natural moment in the story, and it always will. You'll find a place to deliver it, but don't force it in that. Okay, and mistake number 25, not getting great help for free. Look, there are so many tools and techniques that you can use, put into practice absolutely today for making your work better. And we've got tons of them, and we love to give them to you for free. So, is your idea for a book good enough? How can you tell? How can you make it better? How can you start to take the ideas in your head and really generate powerful ideas that will produce potentially best-selling books? Well, there are actual answers to that. We've got an idea generator tool that will walk you through that process, and it really is pretty much guaranteed to work. So I totally suggest that you get it. You can get it from the link just underneath this video. You can also get all of the slides from this video via that link. So just go to that link, do the sign-up process, and we'll send you everything. I hope this has been really useful for you. It's been a real pleasure for me. I'm Harry Bingham from Jericho Writers, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching.